Hello and welcome to Meteorological Instrumentation. This is the second half of the second lecture for meteorological instrumentation. And if you watched the first video, we talked about instrument classification. We're going to continue on talking about instrument classification. Last time, in the last video, we talked about sensor location, where sensors are located, whether they're movable platforms or fixed platforms, whether they're in the laboratory or in the field, or if they're surrounding by the thing that they're trying to measure, they're in situ or direct measurements, or if they are indirect or remote measurements. Now, we're going to talk about sensor type. And sensor type can be broken down into either its response or its interrogation. So in the first lecture, we talked about the sensor. That's the thing that's actually measuring the property that you want to measure. So the type of sensor determines the type of instrument. So here we go, classification. We can classify sensors based on whether they measure a property mechanically, electrically, acoustically, optically, and then finally we'll get down to an interrogation, which is active or passive. So examples of mechanical type sensors, a mercury thermometer or an alcohol thermometer, a liquid and glass thermometer, where you have liquid inside a tube that's sealed, and as the glass and the sensor heats up, the thermometer heats up, the fluid expands and rises in the tube. So that's an example of mechanical. Other ones are aneroid barometers, a barometer where there's a wafer that expands and contracts, or an anemometer or a wind vane where the wind is blowing the instrument and the instrument responds. The sensor responds to the wind speed and also the wind direction. Those are all considered mechanical. Electrical is where you get an electrical signal from your sensor. So examples are digital thermometers, whether they be thermistors or platinum resistance thermometers or other types of thermometers. It's based on electrical signal, as is weather radar. You're sending out electromagnetic pulse of radiation and it comes back, so that would be also considered electrical. An acoustical sensor is one that uses sound properties to measure some type of meteorological parameter. Good example of this, there's not a lot of actually acoustical type devices. There are a few. One of the most popular is the sonic anemometer. Sonic anemometer, as the name implies, anemometer means that it measures wind speed. Sonic means it uses sound. So sound waves traveling between sensors, the time that it takes for that sound wave to travel from one sensor to the other is determined by the wind that's blowing between those sensors. So we'll talk more about the sonic anemometer later on in this course. And then optical sensors are ones that use optical principles. A lot of people get confused with this. They think that if you're reading a display, such as if you're looking at a liquid and glass thermometer and you're looking at the display, or a rain gauge and looking at the display, that makes it optical. And that's not the case. Optical means that it uses optical principles to measure some meteorological parameter. And examples of this are, the clarity of the air, how many particles are in the atmosphere, and if you send a light beam between a transmitter and a receiver, some of that energy is dissipated by those aerosols in the atmosphere. And as a result, the light does not make it to the receiver, and from that you can infer the clarity of the air. Another way of classifying instruments is by the sensor interrogation. So we talked about the different types of sensors. Now, sensor interrogation means that how does the sensor get its information? Is it an active process or a passive process? An active process means that a signal is sent. A passive sensor is where it's simply looking and measuring. It's not sending out anything, it's just measuring what's coming up. And a good example of this is satellites. Satellites are sitting over the Earth, looking at the surface, clouds, and our atmosphere, and it's just measuring the amount of radiation coming up off of the surface, and that would be completely passive. So those are the different types of sensors. I hope you enjoyed this lecture.